described what is a system now. We talk about the properties of CAS. What kind of properties? A system has something we can know. This is we always say there are 9 key features of CAS. One is many interacting parts or elements or agents. There are some emergence phenomena. They adapt to each other. It's path dependence, their specialization or modularity, and dynamic change, competition and cooperation, decentralization, and the nonlinearity. Those are 9 features. It's very abstract. I try to explain each one by one of the properties. There are many interacting parts. It's see modern collections because of interaction. There are so many parts, they are interacting with each other. The size matters. It's how many agents, how many parts, what kind of interactions. It's lots of parallel phenomena or process. Sometimes we say often our agents do same thing, simple things. A doctor treats patient. A patient seeks a good doctor. They are doing the very similar things. But it's the interaction. Different hospitals, different type of patients, different doctors, different managers. By that kind of interaction, it becomes more and more complicated. Even for example, in a research community, the researchers, they do the same thing. By its interaction with the grant agency, interaction with other researchers, it become more and more complex. So it's many the interacting parts. Even most of the time in the world, we are doing similar things. We go to work, we go to classroom, we do our homework. That's very, say this is a simple life. Every day you do the routine work. But in your workplace, you interact with so many others or systems, people in the system. You follow different rules. So it's the interaction part. Even we are doing the similar thing. So this is the very important nature we talk about system is many interacting parts. The emergent phenomena. What is emergent? We know whole is more than the sum of parts. This is emergent. That means you have arm. The whole as a body is not just sum of the parts. And you could not predict behavior from lower levels. Why you can't predict the behavior from lower levels? You look at the hospital, the doctors and patients. You think about the whole healthcare reform, the investment, the performance of health system. You can't observe it. And also we talk about the child mortality. You deliver a baby in a hospital. It's a very simple thing, women will deliver a baby in the hospital. But the behavior, you can't predict from their behavior. We have a massive mortality reduction, child mortality reduction. Sometimes, because it's just changing one person's behavior. So it's really at the higher level. Why special rules laws applied? You could see the social norm change. I would say phenomena. Why? The statistics says, we have the child mortality reduction is significant. But if you go to the rural community now, the women, they won't deliver baby at home. The whole social norm change. They change their belief and the mental model. When they need to give birth, they will go to the hospital. In the past, we had so many midwives. Their livelihood depend on helping the delivery. But now there are lots of jobs. They don't have enough babies to support their livelihood. So this whole occupation will be gone. This is called emerging phenomenon. In the beginning, when we're trying to convince, those people to go deliver baby in the hospitals, we never thought, think through this process. We think, gee, in the future we don't have enough midwives to support home delivery. So that's called a phenomenon. You can predict one baby delivered in the hospital and then to look at the whole bigger phenomenon. That's called emergence. So because it's, we say higher level phenomena are not built in explicitly. It's really, you have to say pathfinder means you have to detect this phenomenon. We are writing about China's experience in child mortality. The pathfinder is sometimes you won't be able to predict. You have to really develop that kind of capacity to see, gee, this is something, it's a good thing we can change people's behavior and then built into the system. This is something, the capacity in system thinking, I think is a big challenge to identify the phenomenon. The other thing is you have to bridge between higher and lower levels of description. Because sometimes you observe the lower level, you observe the behavior of doctors in the hospital. And what kind of phenomenon from the behavior of the hospital? If you see describe a lot of antibiotics, one physician describes this antibiotic. If you look at this one, if you don't breach different levels, but if you look at the national antibiotic abuse, sometimes, you say, gee, I just gave, 3 days antibiotics to, to someone, to a patient. Sometimes you won't be able to understand what's the implication of this one. So the phenomenon is a massive abuse of antibiotic use. So the higher level of phenomena, sometimes you won't be able to observe. How can you really bridge it? This is the thing, is typically on the developed scale. Because oftentimes we study the micro behavior and study, each groups. Lots of research you can see published materials talking about elements behavior, agent behavior, and how they interact. But if you go to another level, you can observe the phenomenon. This is the skill. When we talk about skill, it's the capacity. They really help you understand the whole process. We talk about health system, health policy. Sometimes, gee, I just gave some kind of intervention. I will see, and then how intervention change people's behavior. It's really most of the research in the past is thinking about the equilibrium, thinking about the subgroups. But if you go, even you study the people under poverty, the poor people, oftentimes you observe their behavior, think about, gee, what kind of a choice in employment. But if you go to a higher level, you can see a complete different picture. This is sometimes we always talk about stigma related to poverty. If you look at the stigmatization of the people, the poor people in China, 10 years ago, that's one phenomenon. But when they interact and learn from the system, they have a different behavior. And that only can be observed in a higher level to see stigmatization changes over time. This is called emergence. When people, they won't feel stigmatized, they think, gee, I have the capacity to use my 关系 or connections to get benefit by learning, and then the system's whole picture got changed. This is I call it phenomenon, emergence. The emergence is something in policy is you have to pay very much attention. And the the lots of studies we have done won't be able to help us in understanding of what we call big pictures. you bridge different levels of behavior. So the funding bridge is really a skill we need to develop. The reductionism means you see there are lots of parts like engines, but with a holism, this is something system is we say yin and yang. This is the system thinking, but also it poses challenge. The challenge is how you make it operationalize. It's a way of thinking, but in doing really analysis, I'm talking about emergence. It requires you have some kind of skills to observe it. But if you only think about, gee, everything is relative to everything else, sometimes you will see how you do interventions. So this is a challenge using system thinking. We talk about the holism. It's really a system is by physical, social, or biological cannot be determined or explained by its component part. So it's the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Sometimes the extreme part is it makes no sense to examine the components. You have to study the system entirely. But if you don't examine the components, if you don't examine the elements behavior, how can you come up, understand the bridge? I'm talking about the bridging part. Requires you to do both the elements and the system as a whole. So this is the part you have to combine, not only to describe the system as a whole, you also need to describe, understand the elements of the system. So the emergent properties we know is sometimes novel, qualitatively different from other the feature of the system parts alone. If you want to say you want to be only reduce the feature of those parts, it's very different. I wanted to talk about one thing for understanding. The element parts, how you take it as a whole. But most important is not a thing, it's a process. Element, emergence is a process. The behavior, property, structure can be emergent. It's a process. We talk about the process is how people, through interactions, they can see how they change the system structure, change this whole system behavior. Why is I will give you one example using how you describe the change of structure. When China introduced the social assistance system, the end of 1990s, and they gave monthly stipend to the people. Most of those are laid off workers from the former state-owned enterprises. And the people, they were, we say socialist workers. They made decent life. They contribute a lot. And suddenly, they were laid off. They were unemployed. So when they got this very meager, stipend for daily living, they just feel ashamed. They just couldn't understand why, they couldn't get a job. So let's say you look at the behavior, lots of study, we did quite a lot of case studies and interviews. In this process, they gradually feel they are entitled. This is their rights. So the whole thing changed. They demand more other benefit instead of just subsidies. They demand medical financial aid. This is the rights. And gradually they feel, gee, this is the entitlement will lead them to other benefit. If they are entitled for social assistance, they will have their children's education will be covered, healthcare will be covered, they will have housing subsidies, become such a really a welfare package. They become start from rise, they started to trying to maneuver the system. They're trying very hard, to hide their income, trying to get the benefit. And local communities, they began to use this as rise. If you have, want to demonstrate, I gave you some benefit. And this become guanxi or power relationship got changed. Who has the access to this benefit? And stigmatization is gone. You see the process, the emergence process. In the beginning, you design a social system trying to help the poor, but in this process, it changed. So the emergence is not a thing; it changed the whole structure from a simple monthly income subsidy becomes such a social assistance system. Now you have to think about targeting, how you better target the people who are really in need. How can you really reduce the corruption? This is the process. Emergence is not the thing, is the process. Because we just I listed the 9 features, but most important thing is the first one is there are so many interacting elements or parts or agents. When you do system analysis, you have to first identify who are the, have a separate system. You can't study the universe. We don't have the capacity. And also, I think it's meaningless. And then you put a system you want to study, and then you have to identify what kind of parts, you want to study and how they interact. And then you observe the emergence across different levels. So this is called emergence property. The other thing is about, I want to talk more about this emergence because it's a very, very important feature of CAS. For me, it's the most underdeveloped capacity in analyzing CAS. Is you have the capacity to observe the emergence. It's very interesting, not obvious sometimes, because people interact in this process. Why? Because I talk about social assistance. It's not the whole system design. It's I observe my neighbor, got the assistant, and then I will think about, why he got it, how he got it. So this is something from interacting, and then you can see the whole change of the structure. Sometimes, if you have the lower level, you observe a lower level behavior, you won't be able to see through a higher level property. And we know this emergence can be desirable and undesirable. We talk about desirable part is the child mortality. In this behavior, and each person's behavior changed the whole structure. It really changed the social norm, changed the whole structure of healthcare system in the communities. That's desirable, but oftentimes we can see the undesirable part. But sometimes neutral, because, for example, social assistance think about, stigmatization is really not a good thing. After the emergence, people don't feel stigmatized. But on the other hand, it's become so complex. You have to think about, to develop techniques to better targeting those people really in need. It's a mixed, and the system become mature because other components of a system added to the system. So this is something we want to try. A better intervention or emergence is trying to reduce the undesirable and trying to identify the desirable to strengthen it. And how the lower levels interaction to have the desirable outcomes, how can you strengthen the behavior? And if you can detect that, especially the tipping point is if you can observe some undesirable in some parts you want to really reduce, to identify the causes and reduce the undesirable outcomes. So 3 aspects of emergent properties. They are lost when we break system down into components. This is quite simple. Sometimes if you break it down, you won't be able to observe it because the system as a whole. One element is removed from the system, it loses the emergent properties. Sometimes this is oftentimes one element is removed, you won't be able to see the emergent. And sometimes the removal of an element can destroy the system emergent properties. But we'll talk about emergence is not a thing but a process. So CAS is something, it's a dynamic feature. It's not static. It's most of the time is nonlinear, not linear. So it's really, it changed the whole perspective we think about an equilibrium system, a linear system, or static system. We describe it, CAS is really like a mental model to analyzing things or system. It's adaptation process. Because we say it's improved performance over time. Sometimes adapt your behavior. We talk about social assistance system is people adapt their own behavior in this process. And the interactions, they facilitate evolution process. Oftentimes, behaviors are originally learned but become genetically stimulated. Sometimes you think about, I was watching for doing a study on how this process, you learn a behavior and become part of the behavior for other people's in the process. Sometimes you initially say, gee, it's something new, and then it become a norm. It's a learned behavior. Initially, see, gee, I can learn from others by interacting with others. But sometimes it becomes just become a norm. Its adaptation become a social norm. Is by adapting. This is another story about the research community. Always, because I'm a researcher in this one. When people start to learn, others writing proposals in that area and trying to get funding instead spending the time to do research, it becomes a norm. If you're analyzing the time allocation of researchers, proposal writing, and it become a skill. Lots of people started to develop that kind of skill to write proposals. So if you're trying to change the behavior, say, okay, I'm allocating more time to teaching, I gave more award to teaching. It started to learn and change and become another way how you change the system. It's an adaptation process. This is the fun part. The path dependence. A system has a path dependence feature. Why is a broad concept? History matters. Sometimes you think about an accidental choice determines a certain path. Sometimes you make a choice, you along that path you will go. This is sometimes if you decide after a student graduate from a rural high school, you can have two choices normally: go to the market as a migrant worker or go to college. It determines your path. The other thing is about the reinforcing effect. I was always giving this stories. Some student told me, they were not so good in quantitative skills. Some student told me they are good in quantitative skills. The more time you spend on modeling, the better you become, and they think you, gee, I'm good in quantitative skills. Reinforcing. And like lots of people say, I'm very good as a carpenter. But if you think about it, you spend a lot of time in making furnitures, you're very good. But if you switch, say, I'm very good to be a mathematician, because you spend more time in doing the mathematics. This is a reinforcing thing for, we say, the memory, the past dependence. Why I want to talk about the past dependency is it's more a mental model and is selection of past dependency in economics caused by high switching costs. It's the cost, sunk cost. Why this is something I spend a lot of time in making furnitures. If you want me to switch to something, there's something I really don't know. I have to waste all the years. But I want to talk about this. The thing is, it's a very important feature in understanding the, we say, interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach. We had a meeting talking about how we approach the sustainable development. If you start spend 4 years study geography, and then you switch to economics, you spend this 4 years it determines the way of thinking, the skills. Sometimes the past dependency is for research for things. It's not a bad thing, but sometimes it really is locked into some path. It's so difficult to escape. This is, for example, our health care system. The China's health system is the pathways came from the planned economy into the market economy. This path with the past dependence, the planned economy we had, public hospitals supposedly owned by the Ministry of Education, by the government. But the behavior of the doctors already, marketized. They were using market tools to survive in the beginning of the reform. This is the pathway we can't ignore. Past dependency also means for each country's health system development, education development is all this country's own culturally defined, the structure. So it's different system. And also the groupthink. Groupthink is with the management is how people the way of so difficult to think differently from others. This year's report by the World Bank talking about the people think socially, people think with mental models. So this is the past dependency. Oftentimes examine why I think that way. This system has a memory. In social technology system, we know the we know the development paradigms. In China especially, we know the air pollution is a very important challenge. Dependence on liquid fossil fuels limits our ability to change to new energy systems. And one past dependence is absent, technology can leapfrog. This is the case I was talking about is, you look at many African countries, they don't have the land phones, but they use mobile phones. They can skip that part. Instead of saying, like in China, we started from land phone and then switch to mobile phone. They can directly use a mobile phone. The e-health and mHealth, we talk about why rural Bangladesh, they can use cell phones to deliver, chronic, to manage chronic illness. It's so hard for us because we have the barefoot doctors. We had a system in place. So the leapfrog is something, when you have nothing, you can plan for it. But you have a system, you depend on it. You have to say, we'll destroy the whole old system and to install new system. Leapfrog, is much easier when you have a really a very good design without baggages. But sometimes when you have a well-developed structure, it's so hard to change because the incentives, people's resistance, they don't want to change. They want to protect their own interests. For example, nowadays, if you go to the internet, we talk about internet health. Either you talk iHealth, whatever e-health. Now we have a fight between all those doctors, the Ministry of Education with entrepreneurs. I'm not giving any, judgment who is right, who is not right. It means when you introduce something new, you have to fight with existing interest groups. And also we think about agent has memories. The past star has effect on the present situation. The memory part is the system has memories. Our system has a memory of the planet economy, of the market economy. Now we're trying to, the third round of healthcare reform is trying to balance. Oftentimes you think, it's the memory has many times determines how we come to this far. I remember in the 1990s, we're talking about the pension reform. We have those old cadres. They were policymakers. They have memory. They know how they protect their own things and then what's best in their own interest. You can't say, I don't, because agents have memories. Even the agent has no memory. Still, the system itself has memories, and because the memory is really structured. We can see the tree. This is the tree. The structure. Give it this way. Sometimes even each agent has no memory, but the structure has the memory. If you were born in a countryside, your structure in there, because your birthplace tied you to all the systems. You see the structure memory. Doesn't mean the agent has memory, but the structure has memory. Why the structure has memory? We say called systems memory, the rural-urban divide. We know how we develop our systems. We started for urban. We have 3 healthcare system, insurance systems. We have the employee health insurance system, right? The people, you have to have jobs. That's a structure. And we have the urban residents health insurance systems. That means you were born urban, you had the urban 户口. We have the rural new medical corporate insurance systems. That's for the rural residents. And the different benefit package, different entitlement. Our reform now is trying to combine the system. It's so difficult to combine the system. The structure depends on, sometimes we say the system memories, the system design has this kind of memory. So that determines the path of the reform. It determines the path of development. So oftentimes, either the agent has memories determine their behavior, either the system has structures, that's the system memory. So it's really the path dependence of a system. We talk specialization, modularities. Sometimes, we know originally homogeneous agents become differentiated as a result of interactions with each other. Sometimes, when you start from the system, in the economic reform, everybody was poor. And now we have such a big inequality. The income gap is so huge. We have new classes. By interaction, by working with the system. And also the other thing is about Renaissance thinkers and specialized scientists. We know from the polymath into a specialized expert, special field. The whole field is really so many experts in the specific field. And that depends on each part becomes so specialized. They have to increase their dependency on others. And also the more dependencies between parts, the more organism-like is the whole. The system becomes so differentiated and more and more dependent on each other, become more and more complicated. And why it's also structured is, the self-organization systems become more structured than they were originally. It's a simple system. We observe our own social economic system. We can see from very poor, each community is so similar to each other. And now it's such a differentiation between individual groups, between communities, between regions. So that's called, we see there are some advantages, but there are oftentimes we know is you do analysis, it becomes so challenging. And become so specialized. This is thing and dynamic change I want to focus the point. There are 9 features. There are several features that are very, very important. I'm talking about several features. One feature is the interaction of the parts. Okay, this is very, very important. The other feature is the emergence. The other feature I think about is dynamic change. Dynamic change is not a point anymore. It's a process. The point is the fixed point. You can employ equilibrium system approach models. That means that at that point you think about, if you think about the point, it's the equilibrium. But if not the point, it's a non-equilibrium. It's a dynamic. You don't put into the linear equilibrium perspective. You think about nonlinear dynamic perspective. So it's looking for the trajectories rather than the fixed point, because we know they evolve, they adapt, they change, they learn. It's a process. This is something when you study the health policy process. This is a dynamic nature. It changes. This is very important for China. Why I want to bring this class to study the system. is China's, we say, speed, skill, and diversity. The speed. We have, I think the human history, we've never seen a country in such a big volume. It changes so fast. 10 years ago, one was visiting different countries on development. Their perspective on China is quite different from now. And, we couldn't adjust ourselves. The world has to see when China suddenly became the second largest economy, what to do with this country. So it's a dynamic process. If you don't think the dynamic process, you can't understand China. Why you do field work? If 3 years you don't visit the community, you will never recognize it. So the complex adaptive system thinking is really you understanding the change, especially on human systems. I'm talking about in general, in development, it's easier to build a bridge, but it's very challenging to build healthcare systems, social security systems, social protection systems, education system, those human systems, because people learn, they have memory, they have to change their behavior by interacting with each other. They have lots of emergence. Many of the emergence are not anticipated or are not desirable. So the dynamic nature of the system thinking, you focus on point as a snapshot, but you have to think the entirety how the system dynamic changes and the emergence you can observe. So this feature I think is very important. And looking for trajectories, why people go to that path instead of the other path. And why the dynamic nature is so important, because you don't have the time to reverse it. You think, gee, I can make a decision next day, I can change it. You don't have it because already unanticipated or emergence happened. It's a speed. So it's oftentimes, you can see by looking at the interactions, this unequilibrium concept comes to play. Competition and cooperation, this is very, because in doing interactions, you can see always their relationship. This is not, this is one of the features, but I don't think it's the most important features. I want to talk about decentralization is also a feature, very much linked how you separate the system. Sometimes you think about, this is centralized, this is the decentralized system. Centralized and decentralized is really the mindset or the way you approach it. Many times, I want to give you one example of the decentralization. This is becoming more and more important in the internet age. We know the World Wide is decentralized. And now that we have web chat, right? It's so many groups. You send your own message, you're connecting with each other. It's decentralized. It's so difficult to control. Viral marketing is decentralized. So its system becomes sometimes we talk about system can be smarter than smartest agent. You think you're smart, you design something, but think about the people surround you. Innovation becomes so important nowadays. There are lots of grassroots movement. It's decentralized. Internet really speed up the process of decentralization. No, we're trying to have a centrally controlled system, but in reality, the world becomes more and more decentralized. This is the nature. Nonlinear is the thing we discussed a lot. Is we know output is not proportional to input. Sometimes you can't predict how system will work. by understanding parts separately and combine them additionally. Then you have to focus on tipping point. By observing the tipping point, what is the tipping point? It's very, very difficult. And the nonlinear nature is the system we know is nonlinear, but the point, how can you observe the point and to see quickly, they can scale up things. We know, the phase transition is from ice to water, that's one phase. And from water to steam, that's one phase. In between, so you have to think about the phase transition. I have written a paper with Professor Liang Xiaoyun talk about the phase transition is how you scale up, getting the tipping point. And if there's a good practice, you can really scale it up to another phase. So system changes by phase, how you identify the phase and create this kind of transition point. Oftentimes, those transition points can be created. This is people think about you can create a transition point. I don't believe that. I think if you look at, we have now a new development paradigm. We include green development into our development paradigm. That's a new phase. It's going to change the whole development path and the trajectories. It's a phase transition. That's the part has to from the higher level. And the tipping point is itself, the system itself, they emerge some features you can try to scale up. So it's two ways to really create a phase, the transition point. One transition point is creating by interacting, by emerging phenomena, you can really strengthen it. The other way is from the environment, the interaction. And when we discuss about healthcare reform is how you use the higher levels changing the environment to create a transition point, or how you determine from the internal process. So it's a two diagnosis process. And then you can create the nonlinear nature of the system development. Sometimes we describe the 9 features, but we give a summary about what is the CAS characteristics. It's fuzzy rather than rigid boundaries. An agent's actions are based on internalized rules. The agent and system are adaptive. The tension and paradox are natural phenomena, not necessarily to be resolved. Why we talk about by interacting with each others, there are lots of tensions. Sometimes we try to see, we want to solve the tension. Tension might be the driving forces. People adapt to each other, learn, and solve the tensions by themselves. Or very they will never be able to solve those tensions. And we know systems are embedded within other systems and co-evolve. Give you one example, hospitals are embedded in the healthcare system. They co-evolve with the changes pharmaceutical market, management, insurance system development. So it's always embedded into one system and then co-evolve. And interactions leads to continuing, emerging, and novel behavior. We have talked and inherent nonlinear, unpredictable, and there are patterns, and inherent self-organization through simple locally applied rules. Those are the simple characteristics of the system. And we will have a question about how give one example of CAS. What is the example? We have so many we discussed, but I want you to think about a case, a system, applying these 9 natures. But we have 9 features on CAS, but I think most important, if there's some decentralization, fine, really, but most important thing is it's really a dynamic process based with agents interacting with each others, and there are some outcomes you'll never be able to predict, and outcomes are non-linear from the income. Those are the key features you think about the system, and it's a dynamic process. A dynamic nature, the nonlinear nature, requires you to develop a certain capacity or skills to understand the behavior agents, understand the pattern of interactions, incentives, understand how they learn from the interactions, understand what kind of emergence they in the at the higher level. Those are the important nature of CAS. It's changing your way of thinking from a fixing point, the linear equations, into a dynamic. It's nonlinear nature. Methodologically, it's very challenging because lots of techniques you learn, equations, formulas are hard to apply for your real case studies. So we have to learn new techniques, maybe the methodology part. So that's we finish this section, by starting to describing the natures, the feature of the complex adaptive system, and we'll go to the next section. Now we take a break.后面这10分钟就完了。